So this is Unit 2 in American Government, Lesson 4, and this is about the ratification fight. Okay, this is the ratifying of the U.S. Constitution. So we want to understand some of the arguments about the Constitution and be able to explain them. So when the Constitution was written, when it was finished, according to legend, Benjamin Franklin walked out of the building where they had been writing it in Philadelphia, and a woman approached him and said, "Well, doctor, what if we got a republic or a monarchy?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." And this is kind of echoed throughout American history because it's this idea that Americans have something special and we have to keep it. We have to preserve it. So the signers, when they wrote this document, it's now considered an amazing document, but at the time, there were a lot of people who thought it was not good. They had a lot of questions about it. There was a lot of skepticism. Remember, these were the same guys who had led these 13 colonies into war. So there were a lot of people who said, "Hey, I was better under the king. My life is terrible now." Just lots of skepticism. They wrote in the Constitution that they needed 9 out of the 13 states to sign it and make it official. And so now the argument was, can we get 9 states to sign this thing? So there were a lot of things that people had concerns about. One of them was that they had overstepped. They said, "Look, you have overdone it. You were only supposed to revise the article, and instead you overstepped your boundaries." Another question was the secrecy of the meeting. Why did you conduct it in secret? Is there something you're hiding? Was it corrupt? And then another huge problem was the Bill of Rights. Why isn't there a Bill of Rights? I mean, people literally came to the New World so that they could have religious freedom, so they could have freedom of speech. And now we have this new government and there's no Bill of Rights. And I think I mentioned this in class, guys. This would concern me. I mean, if I were a citizen and I was during this time, I would have been very concerned about the fact that there was no Bill of Rights. The Federalists were people who were pro-Constitution. They said, "Look, this is a good document. We like the idea of a more powerful central government." 3 of the most famous were James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. These 3 wrote a collection of essays that were published. Those essays were called the Federalist Papers. And think of it today as like blog post. When people try to get people to think about something, they write a blog or they write a post. Well, in the day, they did that same thing, except they did it in newspapers, and they published it, and it was passed around on actual paper. These guys are pro-Constitution, and these papers are the most authoritative source on the meaning of the Constitution. So in other words, today, if you're arguing with someone about what the Constitution means, the Federalist Papers are often brought up as an example of what the Constitution means. They help us interpret the Constitution. Let's talk about some of these Federalists. John Jay later becomes the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Alexander Hamilton later becomes the Secretary of the Treasury. He is very, very influential in creating the federal bank, the Federal Reserve, and setting that up. And of course, he's famous now because there's a musical about him. James Madison is also a really important, influential person. He later becomes president, but before he's president, he advises George Washington when he's president. When Thomas Jefferson is president, he became Secretary of State. He personally dealt with the Louisiana Purchase. So James Madison is really kind of an unsung hero of this time frame. I mean, even though he was not president until the 4th, it was a while before he became president, he was extremely influential in writing the Constitution, getting it ratified, and then our original government. Now, there was a group of anti-federalists, too, who had a lot of reasons why they were against the Constitution. The first is Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson was not a true anti-federalist. It's not like he was saying, this document is terrible. But he did have some concerns. He did write a letter where he objected to the omission of a Bill of Rights. He's saying, look, you've got to have a Bill of Rights. why don't we have this? Why don't we have freedom of religion written in there? And that was very concerning to him. Another anti-federalist was Patrick Henry. He is the famous orator who defied the king and gave a fiery speech where he says the famous line, "Give me liberty or give me death." So the same guy who's very well known and who was a big part of the Revolutionary War now is standing up against this Constitution. So a lot of people who fought the Revolutionary War are now agreeing with Patrick Henry, saying, yeah, this is no good. Patrick Henry's big argument was the fact that it says "we the people" instead of "we the states." He thought that the national government would be powerful, and of course he was right. I mean, today the national government is more powerful than the states. Another one is George Mason. George Mason was there. He helped write the Constitution, but he refused to sign it because, again, along with Thomas Jefferson, he disagreed with the fact that there was no Bill of Rights. So this is a really big problem, okay? And my notes, for some reason, I think it's missing. I'm missing a slide. But guys, this is a huge problem because the Anti-Federalists said, this is no good without a Bill of Rights. The Federalists said, it's fine, and finally they were able to compromise. So one of the big significance here is that they were able to compromise. The Anti-Federalist was able to debate, and then they were able to come to a compromise, and the Federalist agreed to create a Bill of Rights as soon as it was ratified, as soon as the Congress met for the first time, and they did. So what's the significance of this? Well, there was a debate. Instead of having a king or a Congress forcing something, the people were free to discuss. And so this original debate about the Constitution begins the amazing tradition of argument. Guys, argument is such a huge and important part of being an American. I mean, this is who we are. It's at the core of who we are. We love arguing, and it's not a bad thing. When you hear people arguing about politics, don't just get mad and be like, oh, I wish you would stop talking about politics. Actually, you should be happy. The moment you should become mad is if debates stop. Because if debates stop, that means that one voice is shutting out the other voices. So we actually want debate. It's healthy. It's part of who we are. Here on the stage are some famous debates. Of course, the Republican primary debate between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders got very heated. This was a famous historical debate between Nixon and JFK, John F. Kennedy. This is President Obama, who was considered a fantastic debater, and Mitt Romney. Obama wins this election. And then here, of course, is the most recent presidential debates between President Trump and Hillary Clinton. So these debates are all part of our history, and that history started with the ratification of the Constitution.